1 BC. Right? He couldn't have been born at 0. He couldn't have been born at that in-between time. He had to have been born when? Before 4 BC, right? Because otherwise Herod would have been dead and the Gospels would have been wrong. Assuming the Gospels were not wrong, I'm going to assume that. We've narrowed the focus of where Jesus had to be born. It's between 27 BC and 4 BC. That range. All right. What else do we have? Well, we have that strange Quirinius as governor of Syria. Well, there was a historical figure named Quirinius, and he was governor of Syria in 6 AD. Well, that's a bit late. We've got a problem, Houston. Either the Gospels are wrong or our history is wrong. What are we going to do?
In the Gospel today, Chief, it says that Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea.
Yes. Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea from, if I'm not mistaken, when was he governor? From, I would have to look it up, I forgot. I want to say 36 BC until 26 AD, I believe, but I may be off on my AD BC. Okay? So, we have to reconcile this problem to find out when Jesus was born. All right? So far, we got 2 out of the 3. Well, let's just forget Quirinius even existed. No. That's not honest. By the way, these are the figures. How do we reconcile the discrepancy? Okay? We already note that this puts Jesus born between 27 and 4. Well, what do we do with this guy? Well, there's a couple of things we can do. We can say, hello, Luke got it wrong. He got his facts wrong. Or maybe it was a translation error. Maybe he meant to say before Quirinius was governor of Syria, not while. This is not likely for Luke. St. Luke was very careful about checking his facts before writing his gospel. You read Luke 1 through 4, and he interviewed the people that he met in order to write his gospel. This is why, in many respects, the Gospel of Luke is the Gospel of Mary. Because it's only in Luke's Gospel that we get the 5 joyful mysteries of the Rosary. We know anything about Jesus' boyhood because of Luke. We know anything about the Annunciation and about Mary herself from Luke. This implies that he interviewed her or knew her in some way to get this kind of detailed information. Again, this is not likely that Luke would have been sloppy about his historical facts. Okay, so again, what is our solution? Well, let's look at something that the church itself said. Let's look into church history. Maybe that will help us figure this out. Well, there are 2 church fathers that actually come to mind very early, as I put their dates here, that reference this enrollment that Mary and Joseph did to be born, before Jesus was born. So Justin Martyr says there is a village in the land of the Jews, 35 stadia from Jerusalem, in which Jesus was born. As you can ascertain also from the registers of the taxing made under Cyrenius, your first procurator of Judea. So again, Justin says you can just go check the local records yourself and see when Mary and Joseph registered yourself. Tertullian says as far along the road as about 200 AD. His enrollment in the census of Augustus, that most faithful witness of the Lord's nativity, aren't they kept in the archives in Rome? So even as late as 200 AD, one could go to the archivist in Rome and find out the Roman census that was done. So, and these are just the references. Where I have them. Oh, there we go. And do. Yeah, those are my references where these quotes came from. So back to Quirinius. How does he fit into this? Well, without giving you a long, lengthy, boring discussion, save it to say this. When you research him, you find out, for one, Justin makes mention of this Cyrenius, procurator of Judea. Is this possibly Quirinius? Possibly, but a likely explanation is found is that he was actually governor twice in his lifetime. Once between 8 and 4 BC, and then again between 6 and 9 AD. When he was governor in 8 to 4 BC, he was co-regent of the area. He was actually like the vice-regent. He was the vice-governor of the region, which is why he's not mentioned prominently in the major historical records. But when you dig, you find that he was governor twice. Once kind of as vice-governor, and then once as full governor. Okay? So once again, we've narrowed our focus. We have to have him born during the reign of Caesar, when Herod was in power in Judea, and when this guy Quirinius was governor in Syria. Well, that narrows it down between 8 and 4 BC. By the way, this enrollment, what evidence is there? There's actually considerable amount of evidence to confirm this census. This is the list of the censuses that were done during the time of the Roman Empire, from 28 BC to 14 AD. And the one that we're interested in occurred at 8 BC. This is just a link to some of the evidence that can be found. I like this article here. There's a couple of New Testament scholars here that talk about the archaeological discoveries prove beyond doubt that regular enrollment of taxpayers was a feature of the Roman rule, and have shown that a census was taken every 14 years. A large Egyptian papyrus telling of an enrollment between 174 AD refers to previous enrollments, one at 160, one at 148, and one dated during the reign of Tiberius between 14 and 37. One during the time of Nero, and one during the time of Augustus, two of them actually, one between 23 and 22 BC, and one between 9 and 8 BC. So what Luke is talking about, their enrollment, occurred probably around 8 BC. So Jesus was born in 8 BC, right? Well, not so fast, not so fast. Not so fast. Whoa there, cowboy. We've got Jesus born between 8 and 4 BC. So we're narrowing the time. Is there any other clues in the Gospels that can give us a time frame of when this occurred? Like a season of the year? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked. It's safe to focus it between 8 and 4 BC, like we said. Come on. Move on. All right. Was it winter?
No.
Oh, you've been here before. If you read your Gospels, in Luke chapter 2, it says the shepherds were watching their flocks by night. Remember? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, why? The question becomes very quickly, why were they out at night?
They're watching the birth of their ships.
If it was winter, I don't know if you've been to the desert during the winter, like in Palm Springs or like where I work now in Acton, but right now it is cold. It is like, it gets down to like 30 degrees at night. My principal has been warning me we might have snow days at my school. Snow days in California, 30 minutes away from here. That's how long it takes me to drive. Snow days. And that's just high desert. In Israel, Israel is mostly desert. In this area, it is cold at night. 30 degrees at night, that's cold. I don't want to be out at night. And neither do sheep. Neither do sheep. Okay? If it was winter, what would most likely happen is that they would have kept them in pens or stalls or caves to keep them warm. They didn't want them wandering around at night when it's freezing. They could literally freeze. And their sheep was their livelihood. They would lose their money. You don't want dead sheep because it's cold. You keep them warm. So the idea that Jesus was born in the winter is really not likely at all. It was most likely. Well, then what's the clue? Why were they out? If it wasn't winter, we're left with 3 other seasons. Fall, spring, and summer. Well, if what you're saying is true, Chip, if they were out at all, it would have to be during one of the warmer times of the year. Probably not fall, most likely spring or summer, because then it would be warmer at night, and you could have the sheep out. So the question then comes, why were they out watching sheep at night anyway? Why not, again, just put them in pens or stalls? Who cares what time of the year is? I want to go to bed. Part of the reason why they were out watching the flocks by night is that they were watching because it was lambing time. In other words, the ewes were giving birth. And the shepherds were there to help with a difficult birth. Again, to protect their investment. Now, when is it most likely when animals are giving birth? Springtime. So it makes sense. Warmer month, shepherds are out watching, making sure that everything, keeping the sheep out rather than cramped in stalls, because if they're going to give birth, you don't want them birthing on each other. Sheep are dumb animals. They don't know the sense to come out of the rain. So that's why they're shepherds, to guard and guide them, all right? So that's probably when it was. So most likely, Jesus was born in the springtime because that's when the shepherds were out by their fields at night. That still doesn't tell us what year, but at least we know what season it was. Come on. So now let's look at another clue that might help us in the story, the famous star. And of course, we know the star was as bright as light. It turned night into day. It was just like we saw. It was just beautiful. It had a tail as big as a kite. Right?
Right.
That's what we normally see in our Christmas pageants. And of course, the wise men are following this star. The only gospel that records anything about this event is Matthew, and we already read that. Okay? The Magi from the east come to Herod, and they said, "We've seen his star and have come to worship him." And what does Herod say?
Kill him.
What star? What are you talking about? Now, back it up. Remember our little play, you know, the star is bright, it's shining this beam right at the manger. Everyone's coming out and saying, what's going on? Right?
Right.
If that was the case, then why would Herod say, what are you talking about? What star? The answer is, it was not that kind of an event. Because if it was something like that, you better believe everyone would come out and go, what's going on? What is this star? Well, let's rule out what it could not have been. First of all, it could not have been a comet. like this picture. It could not have been a comet. Why? Because in ancient times, comets were considered bad omens. They foretold of evil deeds. A comet, even as late as the early 20th century, when Halley's Comet came around in 1910, 100 years ago, there were people that were afraid of the comet's tail crossing the earth, and there were druggists that would sell comet pills that you could take to protect you from the poison from the comet's tail. I mean, as late as the early 20th century, people believed that comets were evil portents. So the wise men would not be following this star if it was a comet. They would have said, "Get away from me. This is an evil sign." By the way, just as another historical note, just before the conquest of Mexico, there was a comet that was seen over Mexico City. And Montezuma was warned by his astrologers that there was an evil coming to the empire. Very interesting. So even in the Americas, this idea of comets being evil omens was popular. It was not a comet. Well, then what else? Well, a exploding star, a supernova, that's what happened. A star just exploded. It was bright and beautiful. Oh. Right? What's wrong with this idea? No one else in the ancient world recorded anything like that at this time. Now you have to understand that astronomy or astrology was the most studied science of the ancient times. We have records, astrological records, of the movements of the stars and planets all the way from ancient Babylon. In fact, our modern zodiac comes from ancient Babylon. We're talking 3,000, almost 4,000 years ago, this idea goes back. People took meticulous records of the skies. And for example, the Chinese astronomers recorded the explosion of the Crab Nebula in the 12th century.